This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We got plenty to get to today. I'll be joined in a little bit by Chris Hine, covers the Timberwolves for the Star Tribune, has a great story that will be on StarTribune.com Friday and in Sunday's newspaper about Marc Lore, new owner of the Timberwolves. Just loved it on a bunch of different fronts. I got a sneak peek at it to be able to talk to Chris about it, but just a lot of good details about who Marc Lore is, what his background is, and some insights into what kind of team owner he might be. So I hope you enjoy both that story and that conversation. Got some thoughts here on the Twins a little bit, some NFL COVID policies that are shifting, and a Vikings legend who deserves to be verified on Twitter way more than I do. But first, what did I miss? Look, interesting piece on StarTribune.com. Mark Coyle, Gophers athletic director, did a Q&A with several of our staff members here at the Star Tribune, and Coyle, isn't necessarily all that front-facing as an official. He doesn't talk a ton, so when he does, you kind of have to pay attention and kind of dissect what he says and kind of get a lay of the land. So I want to do that. I picked out 3 things that were in that Q&A, which you can find on StarTribune.com, that I thought were particularly interesting and kind of speak to where we are right now. Number 1 from Coyle in the piece said that they've doubled their student season ticket sales for football, which had been a real kind of lagging thing in recent years. They're up to 6,592 student season tickets for football. It says they're going to sell out the Ohio State game, that opener less than a week away now, next Thursday at Huntington Bank Stadium. But getting more students in the stands has been a priority for them. Obviously, getting everybody in the stands has been a priority, and that has lagged as well. But getting that atmosphere back at Huntington Bank Stadium, it's going to take me a while. It's going to be natural to say, that the old brand, not the new brand, but getting people back at the bank, let's just say the bank, will be a priority for them. That goes hand in hand with a couple other things, though. Number 1, I guess number 2 on the whole list, number 1 of those other related things, their COVID policy is evolving, it sounds like. It's in flux. No mandate for masks or vaccinations. They're asking people to wear masks inside, but they're not requiring proof of vaccination or negative test right now. Now, Huntington Bank Stadium is an outdoor facility primarily. Don't really have to go inside unless you're going to be in a club space, things like that. But now he did say this interview was done earlier this week. He said that's today, August 25th. That could change in 48 hours. But right now, we're going to strongly encourage our fans to wear a mask, but no requirement, which is interesting. We'll see what people think about that when they start attending the games. And number 3, revenue. Season ticket sales go hand in hand with money. And he gave an update on last year. There was the early report that they could lose as much as $75 million last season, with no attendance and other things jeopardized last season. That number turned out to be $21.5 million, which is still a lot of money. Still, you missed that a lot. He said he thought it might be more like $35 to $45 million as they got things going, but that It ended up being a lot less than that for various reasons, including getting football you could at least played and getting some of their TV and media revenue. So relatively good news, I guess. So if you're talking about the overall health of the program, but again, everything's still kind of tenuous this season. If they're planning for more of a normal revenue year, they're gonna have to watch the variant right now, watch Delta, see how that is going to impact, if at all, attendance and other revenue streams that they have, because they really, when you're coming off one year where you've lost over $20 million, even if you thought you could lose a lot more, it's important, I imagine, for them to get back into something more of a normal budget cycle. And speaking quickly of shifting COVID policies, the NFL is thinking about testing its vaccinated players more often now as COVID variant surges. They've been doing it every 2 weeks. They're talking about doing it every 1 week now. They've got some data, too. This is a good ESPN.com story. Between August 1st and August 21st, the league had 68 positive tests among all its players and staff from 7,190 tests. Approximately 7 times as many unvaccinated players tested positive as vaccinated players. Well, there you go. I guess vaccines work. Who knew? Go do your research. There's a cluster of players, said their league doctor Alan Sills said in the story, 38% of one team's unvaccinated players were infected with COVID during a what they call a cluster of cases. So, this is not going away, but it also goes to show that, teams are going to have to start wearing masks, I think, even vaccinated players, as the consequence largely of these unvaccinated players. And it's kind of the same as is playing out in the world right now, the unvaccinated causing basically the loss of the freedom, which they like to talk about, the loss of the freedom that everybody should have. So we'll see where this goes in the NFL. I don't imagine anybody's going to have any kind of forfeited games. Enough players are vaccinated. It said 93% of players have at least been partially vaccinated so far, which is a really good number. It dwarfs the national number. So we shouldn't be so hard on these guys. They are by and large the models. If the nationwide number was 93%, we would be in a great position overall, but we'll see where this goes as the year plays out.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to have Chris Hine back on Daily Delivery. You might need to get you a 10-timers jacket by now. You've probably been on it at least that many times, haven't you?
I think so. I should get 2 jackets when I see you at the fair in a few days.
I'm going to get the jacket handoff is going to happen next week when we do a show out at the fair. But for now, I want to talk to you, Chris. You cover the Timberwolves. Obviously, you met with Marc Lore, owner of the Timberwolves, new owner, part of the new ownership group anyway, out in Vegas. Big story coming in Sunday's paper. I believe that will be on StarTribune.com Friday, so everybody should go look for that relatively soon. But I read it already. I have a sneak preview. I know people who can get the early access to it.
Yeah.
I found it very interesting. Let's start with, maybe you can start with the backstory. Kind of how did the story come together? What was meeting Marc Lore like? What were the impressions of him as you were working on this story?
Yeah, so I've been obviously wanting to get some sort of interview or comments from the new owners, basically ever since the day that it came out that they were taking over the franchise. So for months they didn't want to say anything on the record, because the deal wasn't official yet, so they didn't want to say anything until things were official. And in July, the sale finally became official, so they started doing some interviews since that point. So, Summer League was kind of a good time. I knew he was going to be there. I had been in communication with his main PR person. Her name is Jen. And we were just kind of arranging this, and we ended up having lunch together. I believe it was the Friday of the first week of Summer League out there. We had lunch at this place called the Sugar Cane inside the Venetian Hotel. And not nothing fancy, just a kind of a typical lunch spot, I guess you could say, or restaurant inside a hotel on the Strip. And we chatted for about an hour, 15 minutes or so. And the result is what you see online and in the paper this weekend.
So, I'm not going to spoil the story necessarily because I want people to go read it. But, some of the stuff that's more germane to a Wolves fan, beyond just being interested in who this guy is, which I think is worthwhile, obviously, in the stories. Some of it is, how we think what kind of owner is he going to be? And, it's going to take a while to figure that out. But are there core values? Are there things about him that you can see, him wanting to implement pretty quickly, as he gains more of a controlling interest in the team, especially?
I think the one of the biggest things I came away from that interview thinking is he is going to try and take whatever notions that are out there about the Timberwolves, that what they're, big free agents don't come here, they don't want to come here because it's cold, and things like that. And he's basically kind of rejecting these as excuses for why maybe there hasn't been a lot of success for this franchise, and trying to turn these things on their head and try to use them as an advantage going forward. That's one of the big things I came away from. Now, whether he's going to be successful in doing that, I don't know. He's somebody who is coming from the outside. He's not from Minnesota. He's trying to learn as much as he can about the culture of Minnesota, the culture of the Timberwolves and Lynx, and the culture of the NBA at large. And so he's undergoing this process. He's trying to talk to everybody in the organization. One of his associates, a woman named Jessica Agarwal, is trying to glean this information. And through that process, they're going to try and come up with, these 3 core values that he has implemented at all of his other companies operate on. And so the story kind of a small part of the story talks about what that process is like.
That was interesting. You talked to Jerry Rice for this story because he has a connection to Lore. Obviously, you talked to Alex Rodriguez for the story because that is the other kind of half of this ownership group. I'll talk about the A-Rod connection for a minute. Just how do you think those two, and I'm sure we'll know more as they get into this a little bit, but the relationship between those two doesn't seem necessarily obvious to me. Just two guys with money, I guess, but one's a front facing a little bit more. But how do you think the dynamic there works?
It'll be interesting to see. It's definitely going to be. Mark has obviously no real track record in terms of sports ownership or anything like that, and it's always interesting to see how corporate ownership and corporate success in the business world translates to the sports world, because the goal isn't always the same. I mean, the goal of a sports franchise is to make money, of course, but it's not the only goal of a sports franchise. You've got to you want to produce wins, and financial success and wins don't always align. So A-Rod has said that, his experience in sports will help provide some of the missing the missing puzzle pieces in terms of like what Mark wants to do. I think the quote that I have in the story is that A-Rod said, we're going to be like 1 + 1 = 3 when it comes to like my sports background, his business background, and trying to get everything elevated to the next level. So that's kind of what they've said. Again, whether this is going to work or not, very much to be seen.
I thought it was interesting in the story. I like the 1 + 1 = 3 quote. That one stood out to me. The other one was Lore kind of talking about his business ventures and, the notion of competition. And he tries to paint himself as someone who's not necessarily competitive or who just wants to win. He just wants to succeed, essentially. And I think there's a difference in that. How do you think, did that strike you about him? Because sometimes you get these guys that are billionaires and they want to crush everybody like in their path. Is that not him?
Well, at least he said it's not him.
Okay.
In our interview, that's how he came across, right? And that's the quote I have in the article. And I do think when you meet him, he is I try to get this to come across in the piece. He is a very seemingly very upbeat, positive person. Very enthusiastic, very curious, very engaging. So I think that definitely comes across if you spend a little bit of time with him. So you can't believe it when he says that. I'm just trying to be the best person I can be. I'm just trying to be the best or have the best company I have. I'm not necessarily out to get, Amazon or whoever, right? I don't have a vendetta against anybody in particular. Sometimes being the best you can be in a particular field means you have to beat somebody, but it's not personal. It's not, it's just in trying to strive to be the best version of yourself or of your company that you can be. You're not trying to specifically just go after someone else and beat someone else.
It sounds like he's made a pretty good first impression on players from the interactions they had playing blackjack with Josh Okogie. That was in the story. That was kind of fun.
Yep.
What's your sense of that? It's certainly going to be a different ownership group at the very least. And Glenn Taylor who also owns the Star Tribune. The obvious caveat we always say, just a different ownership group with Lore and A-Rod eventually than it will be with Glenn Taylor.
Right. It's probably going to be just a different energy. First of all, you have two of them. You don't have just one of them. We'll see how much they're in the community. They're in Minnesota. Because both of them obviously don't live here. I'm not sure, in terms of looking for places where that may land right now with them. But, one of the things that Lore said in the interview was, hey, Minnesota is a 2-hour commute for me from New York. We should all be so lucky to have planes at our disposal to fly halfway across the country. but Minnesota is a 2-hour commute. And I think, one of the things that's interesting for people that are worried that, the team might move to Seattle or Las Vegas is, and he says it in the quote, it'd be a lot tougher on my commute if if it was any more west than Minnesota, was basically what he said. So, just from a practical standpoint, he's throwing that out there about, hey, Minnesota is within shouting distance of a reasonable time for me to get there by plane. It's not 5 or 6 hours by plane.
I read that. I thought that was interesting. I got to admit, it wasn't like the ironclad, we're not going to move the team that it could have been. But again,
there isn't that ironclad, right? But
you're not going to get that.
I think what you see in the piece is, and I think what he wanted to try to get across in our interview was that he is very much committed to investing in this team, in this market. And I think that's what he was trying to get across here. And I think that a couple sections of the story, I think that comes through.
Any other impressions of him before we pivot a little bit to some Patrick Beverley talk, since I haven't talked to you about that and that became official earlier this week?
Like I said, I think he's just, at least from our initial impressions, he comes across as very enthusiastic, very curious, very upbeat and positive. He's got those, as you'll see in the initial lead of the story, he's got a little magician side to him that came out in a couple instances.
Illusions,
not a trick, Michael. It's an illusion. So yeah, that you don't get, I didn't get to spend a ton of time with him, just an hour or two. But I think that's what comes across is he does seem, as for at least as a billionaire can be, as much as a billionaire can be, like a kind of relatable, down to earth. Didn't travel in a large pack or anything like that. Doesn't have like 100 assistants, around him or anything like that. Just kind of walking through Vegas with a couple people, and you wouldn't know. If you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't have any idea that he was, a very successful entrepreneur.
Interesting. Well, go read that story. I really enjoyed it. Good work on that. That's, you do a lot of things well, Chris, but the deeper profiles are certainly right up there with your biggest strengths. So please go read that, everybody.
Thank you.
Like I said, I want to pivot to the Patrick Beverley trade because that did become official. Not that it wasn't going to become official, but Beverley acquired for Jarrett Culver and Juancho Hernangomez. I think that went down. It was a week or two ago, at least. It was
10 days ago. Yeah,
a little bit in the rear view at this point, but. What are your thoughts on this move, kind of how he fits into the roster? And maybe we can talk about kind of, is this it for the offseason after that?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's it. I think there's still some dangling contracts out there in terms of Jared Vanderbilt and Jordan McLaughlin. They're, until Ben Simmons gets dealt, they're going to be always checking in on that situation. But I tend to think this is it's a move that makes a lot of sense to me for them. Juancho was unhappy, after the whole incident with the Olympics and the Wolves not allowing him to play for Spain. Jarrett Culver, we saw 2 seasons of it just really wasn't going to work out for him here. Not a great fit. We'll see if he can, salvage his career in Memphis, but the first 2 years were pretty rough here in Minnesota. And you never want to say that you made a mistake in a draft choice, but I think, they at least admitted that this was not working out, and they've moved on from it. And I think Patrick Beverley, from the roster construction standpoint and what this team needs, makes a lot of sense. They need somebody, they need a veteran who can come in here, add a little defensive tenacity and leadership. And that's what he's going to bring. I think that was a glaring hole on this roster, and he helps address that. We'll see how he feels. I'm very interested to see how he feels in terms of trying to get a young roster to play the kind of defense needed to succeed on a night in, night out basis in the NBA. Is he going to get frustrated with it? Is he going to be patient with it? How is that mix going to work? Because this roster, I'm not sure how much it enjoys playing defense, and we're going to see how that how that interest level increases this year or doesn't.
Well, there's certainly no precedent for a veteran guard getting frustrated with the amount of defense that gets played here, is there? I can't think of a single one.
No. I've wiped some periods of time from my memory, so I'm not certain. I don't. Maybe I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think of a situation.
Well, if he grabs the third teamers and starts challenging everybody, we'll know that we're in for a wild ride. But I like the fit too. I think he's not Jimmy Butler. Obviously, this is not that level of move, but he's a guy that in the right role. And I think Gerson Rosas has talked about players who have who don't need a ton of usage but have a lot of utility to them, who know their role, who do the things that they need to do. They make this. Patrick Beverley makes 3-pointers. He plays defense, and probably gives them a certain edge that maybe they lack at some moments. So I think it's interesting. I don't know if it just in terms of moving the needle, though, it doesn't feel like.
I don't think it moves the needle that much.
No,
I think if you're looking for, signs of development on the defensive end of the floor, bringing in somebody like Patrick Beverley to maybe show some of these guys like an Anthony Edwards the rope that end of the floor, or just to try and get these guys to play better team defense, I think it does make a decent amount of sense.
You said it, not me. Ben Simmons, what do you think? Is this still just a bunch of smoke? Is the longer it goes, is that good or bad? If you're a Wolves
I think the longer it goes, I think the better it is for the Wolves. That's not based on any inside info that I have. That's just me conjecturing. I think the longer it goes, the better it is for the Wolves, because it means nobody's really stepping up to meet whatever Philly's demands are for a trade. So I think that the closer that their demands have to come back down to reality, the better it is for the Wolves, and the more likely it is that they jump in. We know that they want to be aggressive with it, and I think at this point it's looking like he's probably not going to be dealt until the season begins, and we always get the fun situations where a disgruntled player enters training camp and starts the season on a team, and everybody knows he's going to be traded. Again, I can't think of.
I was going to say again. This sounds very familiar.
I can't think of a recent example of that. But if you take a look at these situations where people tend to go into the season disgruntled and on certain teams, the return for the trade tends to be maybe lower than you might have thought, because the teams are painted in a corner. The dealing team is kind of painted in a corner, and the rest of the league knows that. So I think the longer it goes on, I think the better it generally is for the Wolves, especially considering early reports where they weren't really among the serious contenders for him. But now we'll see as the weeks go on here.
You mentioned Jared Vanderbilt. That seems like not a slam dunk, but a good possibility that he comes back. Be curious if Jordan McLaughlin is back too, or if they like someone from summer league or anything like that as like a third point guard, since Beverley kind of fills the backup role more or less. Anything else on the fringes of the roster? Are they done at power forward? Is this kind of it, do you think? Aside from Vanderbilt, of course.
Aside from Vanderbilt, yeah, I think so at this point. I mean, when they're not going to be really signing anybody big, it's just going to be trades from here on out. And now that the Beverley and Prince trades are official, I'm not certain on the exact dates that they could be mixed in trades, but it's probably not for a little while. So I think we're done in that regard. So yeah, but I think the big thing is they you look at it and they didn't really sign any bad contracts. I guess you could point to that. And they are making a huge bet on internal improvement. We'll see whether that bet pays off or not.
Speaking of bets, last thing, a lot of the Vegas over-under totals are like 33.5 wins. I've seen 34.5 at one place. A lot of Wolves fans are like, "Oh, that's too low, easy money."
Y'all loved it. I've seen this discussion on Timberwolves Twitter for weeks at this point. Like, you guys need something else to talk about.
I've been told the Beverley trade there wasn't really anything else to talk about. But does that number feel about right to you? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, this team has not proven it's a 500 team on a consistent basis yet, and God forbid, D'Lo or Cat gets hurt. Watch out what might happen if it happens, right? So yeah, I think that feels right. 34 wins. Like this team has not proven that they're capable of playing 500 basketball yet. So
exactly. Yeah. My point on Twitter, Wolves fans, was go ahead and have optimism. Just don't bet on it, because 14 out of the last 17 years they've been under. Don't forget that. Chris Hine, great story on Marc Lore. Find that Friday on StarTribune.com and in Sunday's newspaper. And we will see you at the fair next week.
Thank you, Michael.
Good stuff from Chris Hine as usual. Please do go read that story on Marc Lore. Should be on our website sometime Friday morning. And we'll be up for quite a while, and then you can get it in the print edition on Sunday as well. Chris teased me a little bit about those over-unders. It's one of my pet projects. I found it's a way to get into the Twins a little bit too, because that 33.5, 34.5 Wolves number, that is not a high bar to clear. We've been talking about how bad the Twins are all season right now, 55-72 after getting clobbered by the Red Sox once more Thursday. I think the final was 12-2. And by the way, they said Chris Sale had an immaculate inning. Nine pitches, 9 strikes, 3 strikeouts. I'd never heard that term. I'm a huge baseball fan for 35, 40 years. I'd never heard the term immaculate inning, and that just got thrown around like it was just everybody knew what that word was. Everybody knew what that term was yesterday. I'm like, what is that? Immaculate inning apparently is where you have 9 up, 9 down, 9 strikes, and 3 strikeouts, and there you go. So back to the original point, though. Twins 55-72 right now. That is a winning percentage of .433. The Wolves played .433 basketball this year. They'd win 35.5 games. They'd go over. So the worst season that we could imagine for the Twins would still be the over for the Wolves, showing you what a low bar it is, and they still might not get there if history is any indication. Let's end with the cooler. Alan Page, Vikings great, former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, won the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2018, Pro Football Hall of Famer. I would say that makes him pretty notable. Twitter, on the other hand, disagrees. Apparently, Alan Page was trying to get his page on Twitter verified, ACPage_77. Got this message from Twitter. This account will not be verified at this time because the evidence provided did not meet our criteria for notability. As a result, we could not reliably verify that the account associated with the request is a notable person, organization, or brand. And Alan Page screenshotted that message and wrote, "Not notable, hashtag not notable," at Twitter. Of course he's notable. I just rattled off the long list of things he's done. Supreme Court, Medal of Freedom, Pro Football Hall of Famer. Like, I'm verified. A lot of people in the media are verified. But all I do is write about sports and eat tacos and talk about jumpsuits. I mean, this is pretty silly. And, being verified isn't the greatest thing in the world. It's fine. But it's kind of nice to help protect your account, protect things like that. You get certain things that are better. So I hope he wins this battle, and I will gladly give my check mark to him if he would like. That will do it for today. Should be great stuff coming up next week. I think we're going to have a couple bonus shows, too, from the State Fair, hoping that all comes together. So could be a very busy week on Daily Delivery next week. Look forward to it. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you again on Monday.